You're listening to The Dossier, presented by Metro by T-Mobile.
It was all a dream. These are the most famous words from the greatest rapper of all time, the Notorious B.I.G. And tonight that dream is turning into a reality. Big just wanted to be the biggest. He wanted to be the best. He wanted to have influence and impact people in a positive way. And that clearly has been done all over the world. Nobody has come close to the way Biggie sounds, to the way he raps, to the frequency that he hits. Tonight we are inducting the greatest rapper of all time into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the Notorious B.I.G., representing Brooklyn, New York. We up in here, Big. Every day I wake up, I hear your voice, motivating me, pushing all of us to be the greatest. The sky's the limit. You did it, King. Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Notorious B.I.G., the greatest of all time.
You are now listening to episode 11 of The Dossier. For the first 10 episodes, I told a story that tracked back 20 years. I hope that I explained all the players involved in this cover-up and also highlighted the investigative work of Phil Carson. This podcast will now turn into an active investigation. First and foremost, there is a chance that Perry Sanders will move to refile the civil case against the LAPD in the city of Los Angeles. There also is rumors that possibly the LA Field Division of the FBI is taking a hard look at this case. Any young FBI agent in the LA Field Division would look at this case and the work that Phil Carson has done and see an opportunity for justice as it relates to the LAPD cover-up and corruption. This evidence I will present is not rumor or innuendo. This evidence I will tell you about was extracted from documents that have been acquired through a Freedom of Information Act request, hidden sources, and the volume of files that are under seal in the first civil trial filed by Valletta Wallace and Perry Sanders.
All right, so what I think I'll do is I have the documents in front of me, so I can read you small excerpts of them, and then you can just comment on it. The very first piece of things, it has to do with David Mack, right? And it has to do with Russ Poole not being able to even question David Mack. And I guess, here's I want to read you this excerpt. So David Mack is a registered owner of a 1995 black SS Impala with chrome wheels. The exact description given as being driven by Wallace's shooter. Mack used this car as a getaway car when he committed a bank robbery where $722,000 was taken. Mack was convicted, served a 12-year prison term. None of that $722,000 has ever been found. And Mack's two accomplices have never been identified. Based on prison logs, Amir Muhammad was the first to visit Mack when he was arrested and detained. If you're an investigator within LAPD's robbery homicide, like Russell Poole is not even allowed to question David Mack. They put David Mack in jail for the bank robbery, and that was it, right? He was hands off.
Correct. And what's also kind of crazy with that is when because they knew that there were not only accomplices of Mack regarding the bank robbery, but then when Rafael Perez got arrested for the Rampart and ended up pleading guilty, they never asked him or questioned him in his plea deal if he was part of the Mack bank robbery or any involvement with the Biggie murder. I'm sure that is Perez's attorneys probably put that as a condition, and you don't let them decide what the conditions are. You're giving this guy the deal of the century. You're the one that specifies what the conditions of the plea agreement are, which means anything and everything is on the table. And it's crazy not to have asked Perez about the bank robbery by Mack and what he knew about it. It's one thing if he doesn't want to self-incriminate himself, but if he's getting a plea deal and they give him what they call a queen for a day, which means any information he provides can't be used directly against him, but they can use that to help further an investigation. That's why you do a proffer session. And that was off the table with Perez. And Mayor Garcetti at the time had a news conference, and he stated he could not believe how Perez, this dirty cop, got this kind of plea deal and got to dictate what the terms of that plea deal were. That you don't do it that way. It's not how things work. And that was their golden opportunity to find out who the accomplices were, because Mac wasn't talking about the bank robbery, but everybody knew that there were other people involved. And in fact, I tracked down his half-brother who helped steal a car that was used as one of the getaway cars and talked to him.
That actually gets me to my next thing. So as an FBI agent, when you do an investigation, you have what is defined as sources, correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay. So in this particular case, I filed a tremendous amount of Freedom of Information Act requests and been given documents by Sergio Robledo and various other sources, right? So I have these trove of documents. The sources that you had, and I won't name names because that obviously when you have a source, you want to protect their identity.
Right.
But I just want to read, I just want to read some information, right?
Okay.
You had a source who states Amir told him that he shot Biggie Smalls. You have a source who IDs David Mack in a six-pack that he and Mack were present at the Peterson Automotive Museum the night of the shooting. Those are two things, correct?
Correct.
You have a source who IDs Amir in a six-pack approaching the source while outside next to Biggie's car caravan. Source brandishes a weapon, and Amir proceeds to walk down the street where the shooter's car is parked.
Correct.
Source who states he witnessed the shooting provided a sketch of the shooter and described what the shooter was wearing, which is consistent with what other sources state.
Correct.
A former Compton police officer states that David Mack was hired to commit the murder and that he was originally contacted to commit it.
Correct.
You hear people say, well, there's no evidence, or there's no trail, or there's no this, there's no that. It's pretty crazy,
Yeah.
Another thing I found, it says that there's a store, and again, if there's anything that we shouldn't talk about, you just say that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I would. Yep, no problem.
Yeah. Another piece of documentation, a source stated he or she grew up with Reggie Wright Jr. and his family in the Los Angeles area. Source added, Reggie is still selling kilos of cocaine and is active in the hip-hop music security business, running Right Way Securities. Source stated, Reggie was involved in helping set up the Biggie Smalls murder and that a male named Amir Muhammad was the trigger man. Source noted Amir told him or her approximately 6 years ago that he was the trigger man and used a Tech-9. At this time, Amir was involved in the Fruit of Islam religious group.
Correct.
Now, what I think is important to point out, when you're doing your investigation, you're almost like a journalist. You're just culling information. You're talking to as many people as you can to really understand who has information and who doesn't, right?
Exactly.
Such a charismatic, charming, incredible storyteller, likable guy. He's forever loved by hip hop. That's it. It's big.
Because
it's just the way he was. His honesty, his brutal honesty, black and ugly as ever. However, I stay Coochie down to the socks. He can do that like a Richard Pryor he was in that way, where he can make fun of himself, and he was just such a charismatic person.
There is a thing that I came across, and it's interesting. It's actually handwritten notes by Detective Russell Poole, and Russell Poole went to New York City, and he visited an attorney in New York City who at the time was representing three people who were there that night that Biggie was murdered. He's representing James Lloyd, whose moniker is Little C's. He represented Gregory Young, and then he represented someone named Damian Butler. And it's interesting, when Russell Poole shows Damian Butler a six-pack, Butler identifies David Mack as being present at the Peterson Museum on the night Wallace was murdered, right? And Butler states, I'm sure this guy was standing just outside the door to the museum as we were entering the party. So here you have someone who was one of Puffy's good friends. He was with him that night, and he literally puts David Mack outside the door of the Peterson Automotive Museum that night. And this would be an example of this is work Russell Poole did, but it then comes into your hands and you say, wow, this is interesting, right?
Correct.
And this is also in these documents is a sign. Damian Butler signs his name, right? It's a photo identification report taken by Russell Poole, and he signs his name on this on April 5th, 1998 at 5:25 p.m., which is interesting. Another piece of evidence, in that just has been sort of overlooked and disregarded by mostly everybody. So this next piece I want to talk to you about gets to the idea that we've always talked about, and that idea is if the LAPD had nothing to hide, if the city attorneys for Los Angeles had nothing to hide, and everyone had the idea that they wanted justice to find who killed Biggie, something like this would not happen, right? And I want to read you something, and then we can talk about this, okay?
Okay.
On or around March 26th of 2004, you received a telephone message or a page from LA City Attorney Paul Paquette. And Paul Paquette wanted you to contact him. He wanted you to call him, right?
Yes.
And Paul Paquette, now this is a city attorney who is representing the city of Los Angeles in the civil trial against Miss Wallace and Perry Sanders, okay? You talk to him, right?
Yep.
And he tells you that he had a telephone call with LAPD officer David Mack, who told Paquette he wanted to have the FBI administer a polygraph test on him, but as part of that, the conditions were if you did the polygraph on David Mack, right, that you
Yep.
also would have to do the polygraph on Damian Butler, James Lloyd, Kenneth Story, and Reggie Blaylock. And these are all people that were in the cars the night Biggie was shot. So what David Mack is saying is, I'll take a lie detector test, or this is Paul Paquette is saying, David Mack will take a lie detector test, but we also want the FBI to administer lie detector tests to all of these people in Puffy's entourage, correct?
Yes. So when Paul Paquette called me and I spoke to him and he told me about this request by David Mack, I mean, just bells went off and I knew something was going on. So I went and talked to my supervisor and another one of my bosses and said, here's a crazy request from the LA City Attorney's Office, the lead city attorney, Paul Paquette. And I said, something's going on here. First of all, I don't have any interest in polygraphing David Mack, and I'm not going to be able to get these other four guys to take polygraphs because what would be the point of something like that anyways? So anyways, I got back to Paul Paquette and I said, you know what? Appreciate the offer, what have you, but at this point, we're not interested. If something were to change, then, I'll get back to you. And he says, okay. Come to find out, in sworn depositions under oath, David Mack himself admitted that he never came up with this idea. This was something that Paul Paquette came up with and associated it with David Mack, saying it was a request of his. David Mack says, no, that's bullshit. That's a lie. That never happened. Paul Paquette himself finally admitted that this was a ruse that he completely made up, and the city attorney's office completely made up, for the sole reason that they knew for a fact that David Mack would not get polygraphed by the FBI.
See, this story is a story only a few people are aware of. The detractors like Reggie Wright Jr. or Greg Kading will say that a conspiracy to cover up this murder would have taken too many people. It just isn't true. Paul Paquette was protecting the city of Los Angeles. He was playing a game of chess. His cover-up didn't have hundreds of people. It had the leaders of the LAPD, the city attorney, and a few LAPD lifers who know if they tell the truth, they would be ruined just like Russ Poole. The city of Los Angeles was so corrupt that they were willing to orchestrate a ruse with David Mack.
These are in sworn depositions where they admit this. They were going to use this against me, where if I were to ever testify in this civil suit, they would be able to try to discredit me, saying like, here David Mack was offering to take a polygraph, and you, Agent Carson, decided not to do it, probably because you would be afraid of what David Mack would come across as being truthful, that he was involved in this. They wanted to be able to say that, discredit me by saying, why didn't you follow up with this polygraph? Well, the funny thing is even in a meeting with Rob Frank and Perry Sanders, Rob Frank, in a sworn deposition, states that Paul Paquette was kind of joking and laughing about this, and that he came up with this ruse and all that sort of stuff. Well, when I found out about that and I talked to my bosses, I not only got an attorney in Los Angeles, but DOJ, the Department of Justice back in D.C., they assigned an attorney, and we went to the city attorney's office and said, you guys retract this or I'm suing you for defamation. I said, I can't believe you guys would stoop to this level to try to, again, they're trying to discredit me, discredit this case, and to come up with a bold-faced lie like that to try to undercut me and undercut the FBI. Paul Paquette, because of this, admitted it then that it was all a ruse, that he came up with this, that this was a big lie, and he got yanked off the case. And he was the lead attorney for the city of Los Angeles. Now, you got to
staggering. It's staggering.
It's mind-blowing,
to think about
isn't it?
That.
Yeah. And I'm thinking to myself, and I'm going to my bosses going like, this is what I'm dealing with. Why are these people so 100% just going after me? I mean, here's the thing. If you want to try to discredit evidence, you can't. Evidence, it is what it is. So I guess the next best thing is let's try to discredit who the messenger with this evidence is, which is me. But they got caught in this lie. Paul Paquette got yanked off the case because they knew the city attorney's office was going to get sued.
See, Big, I don't know how he was a genius, man. He everything he said, he could just be saying something like you think he's playing, but you walk away with it like it sticks with you. Mm-hmm. So it was just, he would always want to see me or see everybody doing their best. Yeah. And so it was just all about doing your thing. Go do it all. Go get it all.
I just want to read some of what these confidential informants provided in terms of information, because it's staggering to think again that if you were to talk to robbery, homicide, or any of these people, I don't think anyone has looked into this. Anyone has gone down this road. So there was a CI in February of '98 that picks out David Mack as being someone always seen at death row functions. In May 1998, CI states he has knowledge regarding the Biggie killing and asked to speak with the assistant DA at the time, and this CI is denied. Another CI in September of 1998 meets with LAPD Chief Bernard Parks and asks to investigate Mack's involvement in Biggie's shooting with LAPD officers who he's already investigating. CI number 7 is told no by Parks. Parks specifically tells CI 7 not to write any reports regarding Mack's involvement, and CI number 7 provided 3 of Miss Wallace's attorneys and 10 eyewitnesses that they ended up deposing. Now, obviously, we can talk about this CI because he has passed away. So in this piece of information, what's being stated is Russell Poole went to Bernard Parks and he said, hey, I would like to look into this because this is where it's heading. And Bernard Parks told him, no, you are not to write about this. You are not to investigate that. Why would the chief of police tell a robbery homicide investigator not to investigate a crime?
Because he would be afraid of what he was going to find out. And he knew what he was going to find out. Bernard Parks knew what this deceased CI now was going to find out. He was going down the right track. He had the right information. He knew what he was going to find out, and Chief Parks shut him down. And by the way, just to add on to that, Don, that wasn't the only time that Chief Parks shut down this CI on certain things that were going on regarding this case that would have been considered crucial and good leads to follow up on. And Bernard Parks shut it down. Those other things too, without going into specifics. That wasn't an isolated incident with Chief Parks shutting down that CI.
It was on more than one occasion that happened.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. But going back to David Mack, again, in information that I have, in the files that I have, just some things for people to know and understand the relationship between Amir Muhammad and David Mack. David Mack was affiliated with the same religious group as Amir. Amir Muhammad was the godparent to both of Mack's children, took family illness days before and after the bank robbery, meaning the day before the bank robbery, he took a family illness day, and the day after, he took a family illness day. And he also did this before and after the Biggie shooting. And David Mack in his career never did this at any other times.
Correct.
That just
those are the only two in a 9-year career that David Mack had. I believe he was an LAPD officer for about 9 years or something like that. Only twice did he take family illness days. Once was before and, like you said, once before and after the bank robbery, and the day before and the day after of the Biggie killing. Now, come to your own conclusions. Is that a coincidence? You tell me.
Here's some more information. David Mack used LAPD radios during the robbery of the bank and knew how police would respond. A search of Mack's house discovered LAPD equipment used in the bank robbery, which would have been highly useful in coordinating the Biggie murder.
Not only useful, but mandatory.
Shots were fired in front of the building where Biggie was killed. Lots of off-duty police officers who were present went where the shots were fired, leaving no LAPD officers when Biggie is shot. Very professional, same as the bank robbery. This allowed the Biggie killer to strike at the right time with no officers around.
Correct. And think about this, Don. Think about the number of celebrities and, movie stars, pro athletes. I mean, this is Hollywood, man. This is a big LA event. And with a lot of fans that are outside of the Peterson, trying to get a glimpse of, a star or take a picture or a video or something like that. And there are no uniformed police officers where Biggie and Puffy's car are parked right on the curbside. Zero. That's beyond crazy, beyond comprehension, and the only way something like that can happen, this is just common sense, man. This is police work 101. Obviously, something had to occur, and somebody had to plan out and orchestrate so that would be the case. It's a no-brainer.
I'm going to continue reading this portion of the document. It says that a search warrant on Mack's house. Now, mind you, this is an LAPD cop. This is not a civilian. This is an LAPD cop that we're talking about, a search warrant, and this is what is in his house. A search warrant on Mack's house found 5 9mm handguns and numerous rounds of ammunition, some being Gecko 9mm, the same round that killed Biggie, and rarely found in the U.S. No ballistics to compare what killed Biggie and what was found in Mack's garage has been performed.
And one of the things that I wanted to do was get those shell casings that were found from the shooting of Biggie and do forensics on it at the FBI laboratory. And because I had been told that they had not performed any of these, the ballistics or the forensics on these shell casings, which I couldn't understand why. So I said, hey, you know what? Everybody uses the FBI laboratory back at Quantico, and they would not give me these shell casings. I said, okay, fine, but can you at least give me the report then that you guys did on this? Well, no, there is no report, or they wouldn't give it to me. And I'm like, okay, let me do my own forensics on this. And I can't recall her name. It was a female that I was dealing with, and I would go round and round with my bosses and saying, like, she's not giving me this stuff. And they're like, okay, well, let's just give them some time. Maybe that was something that they're going to do, or they just, for whatever reason, they just weren't cooperating with that. What I wanted to do was not only to do forensics on those shell casings, to compare them to see, were they shot out of any of the, like you mentioned, the 5 different 9mm guns that were found at Mac's garage during the search warrant, because these shell casings were 9mm shell casings. Now, the interesting thing, like kind of how you brought up, was these shell casings are from Gecko Ammunition. They're only distributed 2 places in the entire U.S. One is in Corona, and one is back, I believe it's in New Jersey. And I talked to an ATF agent to kind of find out the full background of this type of ammunition and, how we could do forensics. And what I was trying to do was not only to see if those shell casings were shot out of any of these guns that were found in Mac's garage, but to see if any of those shell casings could be shown that they came from possibly the ammunition, the Gecko ammunition that I had been told had been located in Mac's garage during the search warrant. And when I explained that to this female at LAPD, again, I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt, thinking, obviously that's something they would want to follow up on. But for whatever reason, they hadn't, or they just would not tell me that they had and would not provide me the results. So either way, that's when I wanted to do that myself. Never got to do it. And by the time that this case was actually declined, it had never been done. Now, I don't know if that's something that had been done later on by when they reopened the case. It's just hard for me to imagine that was not something that was not only a priority, but that should have been like at the top of the priority.
Here's some more information on Mac I think is interesting. Mac had a half-brother named Dale Williams, who was a Compton Piru Blood Gang member. Williams was arrested in a Redondo Beach sting operation. He admitted to LAPD detective Brian Tyndall he stole vehicles for Mac's activities. He also admitted to stealing the van from Mac prior to the bank robbery and parking it in Mac's garage.
Correct.
Now, this, I think, is an interesting piece of information that I found in documents that I don't think many people are aware of. Maybe they are, but I'm gonna give you a quick rundown.
Okay.
The following list is a list of law enforcement officers who work security for Right Way Securities. This is Reggie Wright Jr.'s security form. Now, Kevin Hackey, Compton police officer, was one. Kenneth Archer, he was an Inglewood police officer. Leslie Galden was an Inglewood police officer. Kenneth Cooper, Michael Moore, and Al Gittins. Okay, these are all cops that worked for Right Way Security. Now, the following is a list of Inglewood police officers who were working for Biggie the night of his murder. Now, just put this into perspective. You have 6 police officers who are working for Biggie the night he is murdered, and I have not seen a statement from not one of these police officers anywhere. And I don't know if you talk to him. I'll run down the list. A police officer named Rick Stewart, a police officer named Kevin Lane, a police officer named Cesar Herrera, a police officer named Dorian Burton, a police officer named Rick Swell, and one named Reggie Blaylock.
Let's just say, without going into too much specifics, have I talked to some of the people on that list? Yes, I did. Did LAPD? No.
Got it. This is another statement I'd just like your input on. To this day, Amir Muhammad has not been located or interviewed by the LAPD. David Mack has refused to be questioned by the LAPD regarding the Biggie Smalls murder. According to a CI, LAPD has also never matched the ammunition found in Mac's garage during the search after the bank robbery with the bullets used to kill Biggie. It states an ATF agent named Pierce, an ammunition expert, stated the bullets that killed Biggie is called Gecko ammunition and manufactured in Germany. The only 2 distributors of this ammunition in the entire U.S. is William Powell in Corona, California, and Frank Gerner in Cluster, New Jersey.
That's correct, by the way.
I was just here in the studio vibing out a little bit, and I was just thinking about how much Biggie inspired me as a lyricist. I'll never forget the first time that I heard him spit, and the way especially that he constructs and crafts stories and puts them all together to make like this one full spectrum thought of like a moment in the mind. I was just thinking how much that inspired me as a lyricist, as a songwriter, as a creator, and just how much I'll never forget him and his impact on me. So before it got too late, I wanted to give all my love to B.I.G. 2 albums and all that genius. We're brilliant. You're dope. Thank you for that.
I actually do have in these documents the actual property report that were found in David Mack's home that I want to read to you because I find them very interesting, what was in his house, right? So it says the below listed items were recovered during the investigation and arrest of David Mack. All items were recovered and booked into evidence by detectives Brian Tyndall and Grant.
Who was the second officer that you said besides Tyndall?
It says Grant.
Okay.
Doesn't give a first name. So I'll give you, obviously there's a lot of stuff in someone's homes, but I highlighted the things that I saw were kind of interesting. So again, they found a Smith & Wesson 9mm blue steel handgun, okay? They found 13 rounds of 9mm live ammo, and then they found a magazine of 9mm empty ammo, and they also found a Intratec Tech 22, a Smith & Wesson 38 767 handgun, a Motorola LAPD handheld radio, ID number 5798, a 9mm machine pistol in a case with 3 silencers, a ballistic vest, 52 $50 bills wrapped in clear plastic bag on the master bedroom on top of the bed, and to top it off, a Winchester Defender 12-gauge shotgun. Sound normal to you?
Well, there's a couple things that stand out. One is, why does anybody, let alone a police officer, have 3 silencers for guns? I'll let people read into that what they want, but is that normal? Absolutely not. And the other thing is, you mentioned a 9mm blue steel handgun, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I spoke to somebody, without naming names, that was not privy to, obviously, what was found in David Mack's during this search warrant. But when I talked to them, they specifically said that they saw a blue steel handgun be pointed out the door of the 95 SS Impala with the person that shot Biggie holding that gun. Coincidence? I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. Another piece of information that seems to be disregarded in this story or just shrugged off. It's all written. It's all in. When you look at the trajectory of what has happened, is the murder happens and Russ Poole gets the case, okay? Russ Poole goes down the right avenue, and Chief Bernard Parks does everything in his power, as I've read to you in the documents that I have. He's shut down, and a guy who had an immaculate record at the LAPD somehow now becomes a pariah, okay? So the case after that, Perry Sanders and the Wallace family filed a civil case, and more information starts to come out from the civil case. Now, a lot of this information has to be hidden and buried and sealed, but I was able to explain to everybody what some of that stuff was, right? And then after that, Greg Kading takes the case, and Greg Kading takes what seemingly is good work done by a good investigator and decides that he's going to come up with his own theory. And after Greg Kading does his work, there is nobody that comes out to combat this information that he's put out until finally you come. And what I find interesting is when anyone talks about the evidence of this case, the conversation does not become about the evidence and the facts and what happened. It becomes about attacking people's character. Now,
Exactly.
yeah, and to me that makes no sense because you had an immaculate record at the FBI and there's nothing to attack. So, you know, I think the detractors out there, and I'll just say his name in Kading, I think his ground that he's under right now is very shaky. And I think you can see that in the interviews he's done since this podcast has come out. But what I want to say is, do you find it ironic that Russell Poole was attacked personally, and sadly enough, the stakes at that time were very high because of who was in power at the LAPD. But then here we have you come finally to speak about this stuff, and all of a sudden it's like no one wants to talk about the evidence, the stuff that we just talked about. They want to talk about character.
Exactly.
What are your just personal feelings about that?
Look, I've had people pass on to me some of the stuff that's been said about me, not just by Greg Kading, but by other people. Look, I've never met Greg Kading. I've never talked to Greg Kading. You know what? I've talked to people that were part of the task force that he was on, and I've heard enough from them to where I have no desire to talk to Greg Kading. You know, look, if I want to talk to a clown, you know what? I'll go to the circus. I have no desire to talk to Greg Kading.
Christopher George Latour Wallace, a.k.a. the Notorious B.I.G., a.k.a. Biggie Smalls, a.k.a. Frank White, a.k.a. the King of New York. Our father was one of the founding fathers of hip-hop. He helped revolutionize what was a young art form for the black community and the world. I'm honored to share his name and his dedication to black music, creativity, self-expression, and black freedom. I love you, Mima. Thanks for teaching us who Christopher Wallace was as a son, friend, poet, artist, and father. We love you, Mima. We love you, Dad.
Brooklyn, we did it!